Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Dialogue Podcast. Before we get any further, I do want to let you know that we talk about some serious subject matter in this episode, including suicide. So if this is something that would be uncomfortable for you or someone else that might be listening with you, we want to make sure that you know that ahead of time. June is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, and so we are taking this episode to talk to people about how to support someone walking through a hard time, or some things that may support you if you're walking through a hard time yourself. So while this is a little bit heavier episode, I do think that it's very valuable, and hopefully it holds something that is encouraging to you. Greg Ford.
Yes, ma'am.
Welcome to the Dialogue.
I can't wait.
It feels good to be back behind the mic. This is episode 14.
Oh, dang. See, you started, it's like being at the Grammys. You start thanking people, and you can't remember everybody to thank. So you start counting episodes at like 3.
Yeah, I'm not gonna do that. Well, here's what's throwing me off, because you recorded an episode without me.
Yeah.
I don't know where that lands in the lineup.
We went out of order.
So
we're at the podcast
my
age.
14th experience with this episode, but I don't know if this will actually be episode 14. So I'm gonna start. Ready? We're gonna go. Welcome to episode
14
of the Dialogue Podcast.
This is like what age a person is when they can't remember how old they are. That's what we are in podcast years. Like,
true story. My mom used to take me with her to the doctor's office because I remembered how old she was and she didn't, and so she would have me remind her. Or
it seems like most people probably in their
my job.
50s kind of start to like, wait, am I 55 or 54?
Yeah. I feel like you've lost track already a little bit on yourself here and there. Like you'll be like, am I turning 43, 44?
I have. Well,
yeah.
the nice thing for me is I was born in 80.
Yeah, is.
So if I have to,
that's like a cheat code.
If I need to get clear, it's
that simple math.
It's a big round number.
This year's easy for me because I was born in 84, and so it's 20.
I have no
24.
idea how old you are. I have no idea how old you are.
I know exactly how old I am.
I always forget how old
you are.
Well,
you know, I should say, you know how old I am this year because it was like a big one. But you're right. In the past, you've never known how old I was.
Yes.
You generally forgot.
I've missed more than once.
Okay, so here's, you know what? Do I have my phone? I do. I'm going to set a timer.
Okay.
Because we are going to keep the chitter chatter and any kind of pop culture, anything like that, on a 5-minute timer.
So I'm not a big podcast listener other than like theology and stuff like that. So I don't listen to a lot of like leisure podcasts. Would it be appropriate for us here like to say, hey, if you don't really care about what we think about pop culture or whatever, just fast forward to 5 minutes.
I was going to say, once I start the timer, jump forward 5 minutes.
Yeah, some people might be into it, and some are like, look, I just want to know.
So that's what we're going to do. We're going to give people an opportunity. If you don't want to hear us talk about anything except for something deep, that's fine. Some of you are deeper than the rest of us, and so you can jump forward 5 minutes. The rest of us will stick around for this little 5-minute interlude of just generally talking about things.
Can I see the timer, or do I need to set my own timer?
I can show you the timer.
All right.
Are you ready?
All right, yep.
All right. First thing. Oh, just kidding. I turned it off.
Okay.
There we go. All right.
Real high-tech operation we have going on here.
I'll have to update the systems if we decide to stick with this permanently.
Hey, you just killed 15 seconds.
I know.
Okay.
All right. So it's meant to be fun, not pressure. Lighten up.
I'm excited.
All right. So did you know that you can hear the difference between cold water and hot water? Like human beings can hear that. You wasted seconds with that dead silence.
I had to sincerely process.
Okay, so I'm gonna test you on this. Okay, I'm gonna see if you can hear the difference.
I'm gonna guess hot water is more of a low register, and cold water is more high pitched. Like, how do you hear? You mean hear the difference like when it's poured out?
Correct.
Okay.
So we're gonna do a little like ASMR moment here for you.
Okay, so I close my eyes?
I need you to close your eyes. Okay. I'm going to pour 1 cup, and then the second cup, and you tell me which one was the hot and the cold, okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let me just grab an empty cup here. All right. Put it down here for everybody else. You probably could barely hear that, huh? I might have poured too close.
Okay.
All right. Second one. Here comes the second one. I'll pour a little further away. We'll see if this... All right.
All right.
Which was which?
Well, here's what I'm going to say. Did you pour it from different distances? Because one of them was just quieter than the other.
Yeah, unfortunately, I did pour, I think, too close on the first one. So do with that what you will.
I'm gonna say that the hot water was quieter. So the first one was hot water, and the second one was cold water.
Okay, nope, sorry.
Well, I mean, it really was a guess, 50-50.
I ruined the experiment. When I heard it online, I could definitely tell the difference.
Oh.
I think, and people were bringing up like, yeah, I never thought about that before, but like my mom would yell at me when I was running water to get the dishes, to like soak dishes, and she'd be like, it's getting hot, you need to get in there. And it's like, how do you know that from the other room? You even think about you're like warming up the shower. You kind of generally have a sense of when it's warm, and you never would be able to put your finger on it.
I definitely would never think it was because of the sound. I think I would look and see the shower steaming up.
Correct, but if you can only hear it, it's still kind of true. And I think there is like science behind it, and I can't recall what that was. But in general, like cold water has more of a tinny sound when it hits versus it's a little bit like richer, deeper sound when you pour hot water. Anyways, that didn't go as planned because
all right.
But it was my error.
No,
because
I'm not very nature smart, so I probably wouldn't know the sound. You have good ears.
That's not it. It was the fact that I didn't control like the size of the cups and the distance and all that. That's on me.
I forgive you.
It was a very poorly run trial.
You gave your best.
It wasn't though.
It wasn't the best you're capable of, but you gave the best that you were able to do in the moment. So.
Okay. So for a first run.
If you knew then what you knew then, you'd do something different.
We're only at 3:30. Do you have anything very important you'd like to talk about?
No.
Or not very important?
No, I think we can set the folks free on this pop culture moment.
Yeah, this one was just not it.
Yeah.
It's only 3:43. We're just going to move on. All right, so let's actually dive into what I want to talk about today to you.
All right.
This is, when I say I want to talk about, I think you'll actually want to as well. That didn't come out right, did it? Like, let's...
Hold on a second. I'm gonna press pause here real quick. I got an email.
Okay.
A couple weeks ago.
All right.
From a really nice lady in our church.
Okay.
And she said, hey, I've been struggling a lot recently with, basically, I feel like I can't get anything right.
Okay.
And she
said... So I sent you an email?
She said, Sunday you got up there and you started misspelling a word on that blackboard that you use. And then you couldn't figure out how to spell it. And she's like, as odd as this sounds, she goes, I tend to think like I see you up there every weekend. It feels like you don't really make mistakes. Mm-hmm. And then she's like, and then you're making this mistake in front of everyone. And you kind of didn't even, you didn't let it get you down. And she goes, it was one of the most important moments for me in recent memory because it actually just gave me a sense of peace around my own failure. So maybe today's great contribution of this podcast
You're welcome, everyone,
is that we are tripping over our own feet
I'm
over and over again.
Over and over again. Yeah.
So, hey, maybe that's for somebody out there, right?
Go.
They're like, you know what?
We all make mistakes.
I tried an experiment, didn't work. Did a presentation, didn't work. Can't quite get my stuff together. You're welcome, guys.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
There you go.
All right, what would you like to talk about?
Let's talk about something actually kind of related to that, I think, in a lightweight way. All right. So it's cousins, not siblings with this topic. But June, I don't know if you knew this, but June is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month.
I did not.
And I think that's really important that they actually acknowledge that. In fact, I was just talking to this week's producer, Brandon. Brandon's in here for Scott this week. But we were talking about it a little bit ahead of time, and he's like, it's interesting because, like, there's not a Women's Mental Health Awareness Month that I'm aware of. And I think it's because we tend to talk about women and mental health a little bit more. That's opened up more, but I think men in general tend to be more uncomfortable talking about it. They don't want to address it. They want to be strong, and so I think it's really important that this is something that is talked about. I heard a really heartbreaking statistic recently that said that 80% of suicides are men.
Is that global or to the United States?
I don't recall. I'd have to go back and look.
Okay.
I believe globally. Women attempt it more, but men follow through with that more. They tend to attempt in more, fail-proof ways in that kind of thing. And by the way, I know some people are uncomfortable with the use of the word suicide. I'm saying it simply because that is a terminology that everyone is familiar with. I know that for a lot of people, especially people who have lost a loved one in that way, saying certain phrases is really hard to hear, and it feels very blaming. So that's, hear my heart, that's not where I'm trying to come from today. We are really trying to address something that is super important, right? Because people are suffering. 2023 was the highest recorded rate of self-inflicted fatalities on record.
Globally,
on record.
I'm not surprised.
And which, by the way, I would be curious to hear why. So we can unpack that. But all of that to say, this is obviously a very serious topic, serious episode. We're not going to deal exclusively with that, but we are going to talk about mental health in general and how do we take care of ourselves in a way, and how do we look out for the people around us in a way that's sustainable, and that we open up communication lines so that people aren't afraid to talk when they're struggling. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to hear why you would say you're not surprised by that number.
Yeah, the reason I'm not surprised by that number is, I think, directly related to just everything that happened in 2020. So,
yeah.
You think about human survival, cognitively and physically, is your brain maps patterns. And when your brain maps patterns, your anxiety goes down and you feel confident, and there are predictable things in the world. The world becomes somewhat predictable. You still have things that aren't predictable, but you can drive down the road and know what the behavior of the person on the other side of the road is going to be on. So I can be having someone driving at me 50 miles an hour and only miss me by a few feet, and I'm not scared because my brain has this pattern. And so you had people who were dealing with already things in the world that they're mapping patterns, but then all of the patterns that they had mapped, that they took security in mm-hmm. and confidence in, all got blown up.
That's right.
Overnight. And it felt like something you'd seen in a movie, something of I Am Legend or something like that. It felt like post-apocalyptic or something. And so now it's well, I used to think I could go to the grocery store and get groceries. I used to think I could order something and it would show up at my house. I used to think that I could go out in public and be able to go where I need to go. And now you're wondering what's going to happen, right? Economies shut down, and this thing's happening across the entire world. So I think what it did was take every bit of the mechanisms that we have to have confidence and some sense of certainty mm-hmm. and disrupted all of that.
Yeah.
And if you were already feeling maybe unstable, or you were struggling to find stability before, after that, it probably is, I'm not surprised, it sent a lot of people into despair.
Yeah.
And so, I said at certain points, I think even the strongest people felt weak during that time. And then people that were already feeling weak, I think, felt hopeless.
Yeah.
And so that's, that's why I'm not surprised. I think, the exhaustion and I think the fear and all of that cause people sometimes to make short-sighted or final decisions that like taking their own life. So I'm sad to hear that, but I'm not surprised by it.
Why do you think it is that, obviously there are easy assumptions that I think we jump to, but I I don't want to just assume anything. So why do you think it is that men tend to struggle so much with expressing when they're dealing with something, you know, whether it's depression, anxiety, feeling hopeless?
Well, let me just give a disclaimer, right? I'm a pastor. I'm not a licensed counselor. I'm not a clinical psychologist. But I listen to people a lot. I listen to a lot about psychology and counseling and those type of things because I think they're extremely helpful. But I'm an amateur, and so kind of take this with a grain of salt. You mentioned a statistic earlier. You said 80% of suicides are men. And you said women actually attempt suicide more often, but men are more successful in executing because they're doing it in a way, like the methods that they choose.
They tend to generally choose more violent methods,
Something
or
that's pretty much guaranteed
direct
to do the job.
Yes.
Versus, hey, I swallow these pills, maybe somebody might pump my stomach, or I might make it through, or whatever it might be. There are certain ways that you pretty much know it's going to work, right? A lot of times, we'll call it a suicide attempt, is a cry for help, or maybe things you do leading up to that, things that are starting to become from the outside looking in would look illogical.
No, acts of desperation.
Acts of desperation are cries for help. And so I think maybe culturally, and I'm not saying this is true of every woman and every man, but I think it probably tends to be a little more culturally acceptable for women to ask for help. I think men have a hard time asking for help. There's more shame around it. And so maybe some of the steps that would have caught people's attention, that would have caused people to come and intervene or offer help or whatever, men maybe don't do. And so then they end up doing something permanent, and by the time everybody figures it out, it's too late. And so, yeah, I think men asking for help, I think obviously nobody wants to feel weak. I don't think any women want to feel weak either, but I think for men it definitely is so closely related to your sense of masculinity, which is certainly how people see you in the world. It's a big part of your identity in the world and how you see yourself. And so if I see masculinity as being bulletproof, as being impenetrable, as being strong, not needing anyone, right? We do absolutely value in our culture, in our world, independence, being independent. I'm self-made. So the idea of being needy, needing people, or being weak, I think for some men is just such an indictment on their masculinity and their identity, and maybe don't have a fully healthy, accurate picture of what does it mean to be a strong man? What does that even mean? And so they have this profile that they're measuring themselves to, and they just feel hopeless to be able to live up to that. I think within that, again, we're talking about very complicated things, the human mind and the human experience. And so each one of these things, I mean, you have kind of nuance and specificity in each person's story about maybe something they're hiding, they're embarrassed about, that causes them just such an instability. And maybe they've tried thing after thing after thing and been hopeful, and those things just failed to deliver to their expectations. And so they've just come to the conclusion that there's really, there's no solution to my problem. I also think I was encouraging a friend the other day whose brother is pretty much, I would say, drinking himself to death. Alcohol and drugs, and it's really just consumed him. And this is an intelligent guy. He's smart enough to know that if he really wanted to go get clean, he could, and he's smart enough to know that this is probably how, if I keep doing this, I'm going to die. But I think the reality of his life, at least the way he perceives it, isn't worth living for. the kind of mess he's made with his life, what's happened to his family, what's happened because of a lot of his bad choices. If he got clean today, like if he
found sobriety
today, his reality he doesn't want to live with. And so the idea of being sober
has no appeal.
Isn't appealing.
Yeah.
So again, what has that led him to? That's led him to essentially numbing his senses and choosing to be high or inebriated until he just ceases to exist, right? So I think, again, that's one example of what would lead someone to the place where they don't see life as worth living anymore. Mm-hmm. And it's heartbreaking. Yeah. But I think men tend to probably not ask for help as much, and would rather probably, some of them, be dead than be embarrassed of being weak. I'm tired of being embarrassed. I'm tired of dealing with my reality. And there's no reality and preferred future I can imagine that I think is possible that's worth me living for. And they get into that place, they make a final decision.
Yeah. Do you think that it's harder for men to actually get help so not even to seek it out, but let's say they have sought it out, that it's harder for them to get the support that they need than it is for women?
What do you mean by get help?
For example, I think sometimes men are unsure maybe how to go about approaching asking for help, and so maybe people don't take them as seriously when they say something. Do you think that's possible, or do you think that people tend to take it very seriously once a man gets to that point?
It'd be hard for me to speak for all men. I think to get help, you need to trust someone to the level that they're a safe place, that you could really sort of empty your soul, put it all on the table, and have someone that cares, that wouldn't use it against you, that wouldn't take all your vulnerabilities, right? So if I'm going to unpack what's in my mind and heart, I have to make myself vulnerable to someone. That means no secrets. That means I'm unpacking, unloading my soul. Okay, whose hands are you putting that in?
Yeah.
Your friends, your family.
Yeah.
A lot of families, frankly, aren't really structured that way, man. That does not. It wouldn't be a safe place. So you're going to go to some counselor. A lot of them have been to counselors. I'm paying per hour. I think counseling's great, but you're going like the depth of support. What it would take to do that. Do I trust someone to that level? And then the person I trust, are they even skilled to that level? Are they able that level to provide the level of support that you need? So I think the idea of making yourself vulnerable, of trusting, is.
Didn't you see Ice Age 3: The Meltdown?
Yep, you need to stay in the office. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what happens when you have a podcast
in the summer
during summer break.
Yeah. Yeah, but in terms of getting help, I mean, I don't know. I mean, yeah, maybe in some scenarios, I don't know. I think, I think a lot of men have a hard time trusting, a hard time being that level of vulnerable. I was talking to a guy one time who really shared his journey with me, and he had gone to multiple counselors, and he had done some serious deep work, like incredible, and gone into some very dark places of his past and his pain. And he was talking about how he really sees himself feels like he's a coward. Like he's like, sees himself as weak, and he's like, he mentioned like the soldiers that stormed the beaches of Normandy. He's like, there are these people who have done these courageous acts of valor, throughout our history, like the men that stormed the beaches of Normandy. And he's like, I'm over here crumbling over this thing and that thing. I've never had to face anything like that. And I let him finish, and I heard him out, but I was like, dude, in some ways, what you're doing might take more courage.
No doubt.
And that's taking nothing away from D-Day, nothing away
not.
from the soldier that puts his life on the line.
Of course not.
But there have been plenty of people who are willing to get into a firefight, literally, that couldn't find it within themselves to face their demons or to face the dark places of their mind or their past.
Yeah.
And they end up losing on that battlefield.
That's right.
So I was like, man, the amount of courage it takes for you to go and be vulnerable and to open up and to go to a second counselor or third counselor, or to not stop, like to have the tenacity, like that takes some serious toughness.
Oh, 100%.
Real toughness to do that. So, yeah, I think, you know, another thing too is I think a lot of men like maybe grew up in an environment where it was seen as feminine to talk about your feelings, or to really talk much at all about anything outside of just pragmatic things. So if that wasn't modeled for you by the men in your life, or it's very uncomfortable for you to do that, you're not maybe skilled at that. You know, I mean, again, I kind of talk for a living. I study for a living. I have to take these things that are ancient texts and bring them into our context. So that takes a lot of that sort of introspective, and interpersonal intelligence, and I'm using that muscle every day. So for me to kind of go into my own mind or feelings or whatever, that's pretty normal for me. A lot of guys, but again, my dad was a guy who expressed his feelings a lot.
Yeah,
My dad was a guy.
I was just going to say that you had a little bit of an advantage where you had a dad that was very comfortable with feelings.
So if that was kind of shamed, you know, to go do that work when you feel like I'm not even equipped to do that, you know, you keep those demons locked away, you know, they continue to haunt you. So I think eventually people go, I don't even, I don't have it.
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, being able to participate in that way, you know, females tend to be more verbal. They, you know, sit there and talk about their feelings, more comfortable with the feelings in general. So that's kind of a lot of the work you have to do often to get some sense of peace around these.
And I think also what you said is a twofold issue, because I think, number one, for the man going and asking the people in his life and being vulnerable and saying, hey, I need help. And then number two, often, you know, if he's a man, he is going to other men, and a lot of times those men are also not comfortable with those kinds of things. And so they're trying to be a supportive friend, but maybe are not really comfortable with it and unsure how to be supportive.
So I've talked to so many men over the years. Often, like, I'll have a friend or somebody that will reach out to me because I think they sense like I'm a safe place, and they sense that I care, and that, again, I've spent my life kind of thinking about these deeper existential things, and maybe I might have something to offer. So often I'll ask a guy a question about his feelings or his motives or something beneath the surface. And men very often tend to go, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And then almost kind of stop there, you know, and you kind of press them, well, hey, why don't you talk about what it might be, you know? And a lot of them just have a very, very hard time doing that. I would imagine, could be wrong, probably most women, they tell you something about how they're feeling or whatever. You go, why do you feel that way? They may say, I don't know, followed by 10 or 15 minutes of internal or external processing.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Or if
they're much more willing.
If they say, I don't know, and they stop, your friends will generally press you. Yeah.
And eventually, I mean, they're much more comfortable, you know, musing about it or processing it out loud.
Yeah.
And a lot of men just like, I don't know. And then they stop.
Yeah.
Well, you can't do that. Like, I mean, or you got to suffer the consequences of not being clear and being maybe haunted, you know, by what's beneath the surface.
Yeah. I think culturally we've done such a disservice to men. And I'm glad that this is becoming something that we talk about more, because men are not inherently less emotional or inherently less social or whatever. They've been taught that they're not supposed to, right? That they're not. And of course, men and women often like express things in different ways. I'm not saying we're all identical. Everyone's an individual, and there are just some, you know, differences between different types of people. But I do think that, you know, especially in this country, I can speak for our culture here, men grew up, you know, you don't cry, you don't talk about feelings, you don't, when they really did have a well of deep things that they were feeling and they were told that they're not allowed to express it or to feel it. Well,
or
it doesn't just
or
go.
to channel it into anger, or to channel it
That's
into
right.
work ethic, or to
That's
channel
right.
it into, you know,
There were
take
only
all that
certain
rage and
sanctioned things that you could channel into. And the reality is those things cannot absorb the full range of your emotions. They can't.
well, then you learn to live off the fuel.
That's right.
Right. So then now it's like that's literally what's fueling your
That's right.
your life. And so, you know, it's the stuff we've talked about before about, you know, fossil
Clean
fuels.
energy and dirty
Yeah,
energy.
fossil fuels
Yep.
are that. Yeah, I mean that'll get you from 0 to 60 real quick, but it's also contaminating.
That's right.
the
What is it doing
environment.
to you in the process?
Yeah.
What is it doing to your own soul? What is it doing to your
To the people
relationships?
around you.
Yep.
And it gets you results, but again, so now you've ordered your life around the, you know, channeling either the pain, the hurt, the confusion, the subterranean anger. Take that, compress it like a fossil fuel, and refine it and turn it into productive work.
Yeah.
How has that turned out?
Yeah, and I think, unfortunately, what it's also led to is a lot of guys thinking that they're angry all the time when the reality is anger is the only emotion that they've been allowed to express. And so they are feeling a whole range of other things underneath that are kind of all being funneled into anger to the point that eventually they don't know the difference anymore.
Yeah, in some circles, it's actually sort of affirmed as masculinity. So, you know, again, think about certain comedians that are very angry. I mean, it's funny. It's also, it's part of their brand. Like, you know, somebody who, you know, angry characters, you know, angry, you know, people that have that,
Yeah.
like that would be sort of propped up as masculine. And so again, for a guy, you know, certainly wanting to have a sense of his own masculinity, which is totally fine. It's right. I identify with that 100%. But to then have created that identity and that definition as anger being a positive part of that in some way, right?
And I also want to make sure that I'm clear in not saying that anger is somehow an unacceptable emotion. Anger is a very natural, acceptable emotion. It's something that there are times when it's right for you to be angry over things. There are times where you've been hurt and you will have a reaction where you feel angry. That's okay. It's just about, let's not try to call everything anger.
Yeah, anger is something that is complicated and you want to understand it.
That's right.
What you don't want is confused anger or anger that is subconscious anger,
Right.
that is now fueling your life. And I don't even fully understand
Yeah.
all of these feelings, right? I mean, I talked about it, I don't even know, weeks ago about working your way through your feelings. It's you don't want to get stuck in them, but you want to go into them, not to get stuck in the quicksand of the emotion. That's why a lot of people are afraid of emotions. If I go in, I'm going to get stuck. I'm never going to get out.
Right.
I'm never going to get out of this anger. I'm never going to get out of this sadness. No, go in with your heart, but go in with your head. Look around, study it, understand it, and the more I can understand it, then I can bring some control to it. Doesn't mean control it like you can control that light switch. I can turn it on and off.
Right.
Or, you know, it's not that I have full control, but it's that I understand it. Therefore, I can make decisions not just by the angry feeling that I have.
Right.
So
It's not
anger is something
owning
you
me.
got to understand it. And when you go in and understand it, now again, I can control it and not having it control me.
Yeah.
So anger has its appropriate place. But what you don't want is anger controlling you when you really frankly don't understand where it's coming from. And because it has such a pressure to it, often relieving that pressure feels so good.
Yeah.
That you now go, good feeling, therefore this is good.
Yeah.
And especially if you can cognitively justify your behavior.
Right.
You do all kinds of reprehensible things,
That's
create
so
all
true.
kinds of damage.
Yep.
But the reality is you weren't controlling it, it was controlling you.
Mm-hmm. I think when you talk about controlling it or owning it or it owning you, you think about maybe an example of that would be someone who's going through extreme grief, right? And we're not saying that somehow you can just control and not feel grief, because waves of grief will come in layers and crash over you at different points. It's a process, and sometimes it will surprise you when it pops up and it feels overwhelming. But it's the difference between letting the wave crash, you feel it, you experience it, you walk through it, versus it crumpled me, I can't keep living my life. It's stolen my ability to move forward in any way. That's what we mean when we're talking about having a level of control. Not that somehow you can just shut it off or that you can manipulate it in a certain way, but that you know how to navigate it and work your way through to the other side. It's interesting too, by the way, when you talk about anger, the flip side of it that you typically see for a lot of women, and I can speak from experience on this one myself, whereas guys, it tends to be the one emotion that is considered acceptable by a lot of society, and so they channel, again, we're speaking in broad terms. Obviously, this is not exactly true for everyone, but in general, that it's like anger is the most acceptable thing that men are allowed to channel their other feelings into. For women, it's kind of flipped on its head, and it's almost the opposite, where it's like, it's not okay to be angry as a woman. That's not like what a good woman would do. And especially if you're a person of faith, like that's not what a good Christian woman would do, whatever. The reality is, no, you're allowed to feel anger too. And things will make you angry, and you stuffing it is not going to make it go away. Now it's just subterranean. It's still there. And so you have to be willing to admit that you're angry, be willing to walk through those feelings of anger, and there's no reason to heap shame on top of the anger, feeling bad about feeling angry. You can't control the fact that something made you angry. It's about what you do with it. And just sitting around and feeling bad that you felt angry, now you've just got two negative emotions hanging around instead of one. And you're not making any progress in that space. I also would like to double back, if you don't mind, to what you were talking about when you said, people really need to have a very safe space to be that level of like gut-wrenching honest about where they are. You and I have talked about this before on a Sunday morning when we spoke publicly. It's not something I talk about a ton, but I've talked about it here and there. But like, I went through a very dark time myself, where I wouldn't say that I was actively planning something to not be around, but I didn't want to be. It was very hard to wake up every day and be like, okay, I'm still here, and I've got to do this again. And a lot of times it was minute by minute. I would go, okay, I'm going to choose to still be here for 5 minutes, because that's all the further into the future I can handle thinking about sticking this out. So I'm just going to go 5 minutes. And for some people, by the way, maybe that may be a mechanism that helps you get through in the short term, is just take, sometimes even one day is too much at a time. Take it minute by minute if you have to. But give yourself that space to just take on what you can manage. And so I have such compassion for people that are in that place, because it really is heart-wrenching. And I think people assume that those who do take their own life, or who are struggling with feelings that have to relate to that, I think a lot of people think, oh, they're so selfish, or they're so self-absorbed, or weak, or how could you want to do that to your family and whatever. And no one wants that. No one wants to take themselves from their family. Oftentimes they think their family would be better off. They're trying to be selfless because they think that I'm just draining people. Or I think people underestimate the point of weakness and hopelessness that someone has to be at for that to be appealing. It's not something people come to lightly. It's not a cheap way out. It's it's devastating for the person that's walking through it, and they don't want to be there either. And a lot of people, you know, they're not just looking to check out. I think a lot of people really, really, really struggle and fight and to try to cling to hope and to cling to a reason to hold on. So, like, please just have compassion for people in that space. You know, I would encourage people, if you have never been there, I'm so glad you've never been there. Truly so glad. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. And if you're with someone who is walking through a time like that, there's no amount of just encouraging them to snap out of it that is the answer. They are doing their absolute best to try to fight through every day. When you talk about having a safe space to just be that vulnerable, you absolutely were that for me. And that was the key for me being able to get out of that space. I was just overwhelmed with, 2020 was kind of the height of it for me. It was like I was already struggling, and then that was kind of felt like it was pulling the final straw for me. And so when I finally got to the point, it was incredibly difficult for me to say to you that I was in that dark of a place. Very, very, very hard. I hated it. I didn't want to admit it. It felt awful. But when I did, you did such a fantastic job of being a space for me that I could come and just be honest about how bad it was. And you didn't make me feel worse. And you asked me, instead of just assuming what I needed, you asked me what I needed. And when I wasn't sure right away, you made some suggestions. What about this? What about this? You helped me get to a point of clarity. Obviously, I think the mainstays that people always need to pursue is make sure there's not a medical reason, because there are things that can affect your brain. So go to a doctor, get some support, get some therapy, go to a support group, something that helps you through what you're working through, and then have someone that you are that vulnerable with. For me, one of the most valuable things that you did without fail was at the end of every day, doesn't matter how long it's been, this still like chokes me up because it was so valuable to me. At the end of every day, you would just give me a hug or reach over and squeeze my hand or something like that, and you would say, thank you for fighting through another day. And it just made me not feel alone, and it made me feel seen and cared about and protected, and I think that's really, really important for people when you feel like you are literally fighting for your life. The hardest thing is feeling like you're fighting for it alone. And so for somebody to recognize and validate what you did and be grateful that you're still here is so impactful and helps you go, okay, yeah, I can do tomorrow. I can do this. You helped me calibrate and come back to center with something so simple. And I really appreciate the faithfulness with which you did that. And the way that you would check in, and you didn't make me feel like I was weak or hopeless, because I was already so embarrassed that I felt weak. You just did such a great job of coming alongside me and being like, hey, it's okay. Like, everybody has a moment when something overwhelms them. It doesn't make you a weak person. It just means that this has been a lot. And so let me walk it through with you. And there will never be enough thank you for that. That I'm so, so grateful. And so I would just encourage people who are, obviously that's a lot. That's a long time talking about one thing. But I would just encourage people, if you are walking through that dark time, I know firsthand how hard it is to reach out and ask for help. Man or woman, it's not fun. But do it. Do it, because there are people more people than you probably even realize who care about you and who want to walk through this with you and are on your team, and they will do whatever they can to support you. And then secondly, if you have someone in your life that's walking through that dark time, you don't have to take it upon yourself to help them alone. Help them get other resources as well. And just don't underestimate the power of your presence. You don't have to jump in and fix everything. But don't underestimate the power of the other person that's struggling, knowing how much you love them, what that does for them.
So I have a few thoughts with it. So you'd mentioned me, thanking you for, fighting another day and showing up another day, right? So think about this. Like, I guess I have a few thoughts for people supporting people. What you felt in the moment was weak because it felt like it took all that you had just to exist for it another day, right? The reality is that's where heroic efforts take place. Heroic efforts aren't, I can leap tall buildings in a single bound and I can run through this wall and I don't even feel it because no, heroic efforts are, I feel incredibly weak, but I'm still showing up. I'm still fighting through. I'm not giving up because this is worth it, right? That's a heroic effort. So what you're doing is taking someone who doesn't feel anything like a hero. There is nothing that feels heroic about it. The reality is it is heroic. So in supporting that person, you're going, thank you for another heroic effort. And to help a person that feels completely weak and powerless to actually see the heroism in what they're doing. And that's reality. I mean, that's not like empty words like, oh, you're a hero. You're like, no, that is what heroes do.
Yeah.
They continue to show up and stay the course when they feel like they've got nothing left. So I think the opportunity to help put that mirror up to someone and help them see what you see. I know you feel weak, but I think you're a hero, and thanks for fighting today. I think the other thing too, and I appreciate you honoring, me and everything, but I wasn't perfect in the whole thing, and neither of us knew exactly what we were doing, and there were times where I was confused. And one of the things I learned along the way is when someone's behaving in a way, or you see things in them that are confusing to you, that don't make sense, don't just assume that they're healthy. So like, for example, if you and I were out for a walk and you weren't keeping up, okay, I might go, if I just jump to a conclusion, I might go, why are you so lazy? Why are you walking so slow? Why won't you keep up? You're weak. No, dude, you might have a broken foot. You might have a twisted ankle. You might have something physically that's prohibiting you from being able to keep up. And I think when it comes to like emotions, like it would be very obvious if you'd rolled your ankle or broke your foot, because you would be limping in such an obvious way. And I would touch your foot and you'd be, and it would just be, so we would be able to do the diagnostic a lot quicker. When it comes to someone's mind or their mental health, the limps come out sometimes in ways that you're like, it's not as obvious as a physical limp, right?
Yeah, harder to identify.
So you might just see it as weakness, or you might just see it as they're lazy, or you might just see it as they're moody, or whatever it might be. But what they're doing is they're limping in front of you. They're emotionally limping. To just jump to the conclusion and start kind of coming, even because what happens is then you tend to come on with accusations, right?
Right.
Why can't you keep up, man? What's wrong with you? You lazy? You're weak? Come on, step it up. You got to step up. And so you're giving somebody this pep talk or this, inspirational speech who's got a broken foot, dude. That's not what they need. They don't need you putting pressure on them. They need you to slow your pace down enough to help them get clear, like, what's going on. And at first, you know, as things were starting to kind of build for you, I misread some of those signals. I'm like, why is Shaylyn creating drag? Why is Shaylyn, you know, acting this way? And my first conclusions were through the lens of someone who, you know, had all the joints healthy, right?
Yeah, I felt confused by a lot of things in the beginning too. Like I wasn't 100% sure what was wrong with me. I just it's the slow boil of the frog, right? Like you don't even really realize that something is fully off until all of a sudden you're like, wait a second.
Well, it's low grade, right? So you're going like, maybe it'll go away.
Right.
Maybe this will go away in a couple weeks, or you just kind of
I'm
wait
just
it out.
stressed. I'm just you start kind of blowing.
I mean, I think the body is a good visual to where you're like, there are certain aches or whatever. You just push through it.
Right.
It's going to work out through it. All of a sudden it's gone.
It's
you're
no
good.
big deal. Right.
And then sometimes it's like, no, man, this is getting worse and worse and worse. And now I can't even lift my arm above my, you know, I can't even lift it above my shoulder. And so now it's become much bigger.
Yeah.
So I think like you're trying to figure that, I'm trying to figure that out. Is this something you just bite down and step it up and you'll be whatever? Or is this, no, this is a much bigger thing. And so I think to be a good partner in that process, you got to try to, you know, help recognize an emotional limp when you see it, and be supportive and make space for that person's emotions.
Yeah.
And not take this stuff personally. You know, again, that was something I had to kind of figure out, because it's like when you hear like, hey, you know, it's not that I want to take my own life, but part of me just kind of wishes it was done. And as your husband, right? First, if I don't really take a mature position and make space for you to say that and feel that, and to be a safe place for you to come unload your soul, I could mess that up real bad. I could start saying, well, sorry, I'm not good enough to stick around for. The kids and I, we're not enough for you, or whatever that might be. And now you're like, oh, dang, this isn't a safe place. Okay? Because no, Greg, it has nothing to do with you're not a good husband. It has nothing to do with I don't love our kids. It has nothing to do with anything you did wrong. This isn't a blame game.
Yeah.
This is, I'm trying to be honest and unpack this thing so we can sort it out, because I don't want to stay where I'm at.
Yeah.
But the trajectory I'm on, it feels like I'm in a nosedive.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where, like, the listener, especially if it feels personal, you've got to have broad enough shoulders to make space for that person to go ahead and have their feelings, like to go ahead and say what they need to say. Because even that act in and of itself is a little bit of progress. Even just being able to say it and not get punished for it, and not, oh, dude, now I just hurt you.
Right.
Like, dude, I'm hurting. I need to be able to.
Because that is why a lot of people, I think, don't share how dire their situation is they're afraid to hurt the other person. They're afraid to scare the other person, or they're afraid to be judged by the other person. So, I mean, that is a first act of courage.
Yeah, the moment you volley back with, well, sorry, I'm not good enough to stand, you know, to stick around for it. Now it's like, oh, man, you know, they trusted you. Yeah. And so, again, that's part of, I think, for creating safety. A lot of men would, you know, ball up their fist and defend their family member's honor, or if there was a threat, they'd fight, you know. But it's like, this is another layer of protection. Frankly, maybe more important.
I agree.
To be able to create that kind of space.
Huge.
And to not penalize that person for it. I would say, like, if anything, err on the side of just listening and asking questions. Yeah. And fight any feeling that you have to take it personally. Yeah. Because it most of the time has nothing to do with you. Yeah. And the fact that they're opening up to you is even more evidence that it has nothing to do. They're seeing you as a partner in the solution. That's right. Not the cause of the problem.
That's very good advice. Very good advice.
So that's, I guess, that would be a few thoughts to those who have people. It's an elusive solution, right? It feels very elusive. It's intangible. I can't grab it. I can't count it. I can't put it in a spreadsheet. I can't physically manipulate it. So you've got this thing that you're you know, but it's high stakes, and it's in many ways robbing people of their lives. It's, you know, whether it literally causes them to lose hope and take their life, or they continue to suffer on, you know, in bondage. This is going to take us working together. It's going to take us going to the Lord. This is going to take us being willing to get in these trenches together and to not turn this person out into an opponent. Because what you're not going to do is logically make them snap out of it by going, but you have so much to live for.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not it.
I mean, it's not. And so, yeah, I mean, I am thankful that, I know you've gone on quite a journey, and you're in so much better of a place now. But that was because you were willing to open up. You were willing to keep showing up, and you were willing to go into things at times that frankly you I remember you saying like there were no solutions, like the areas, the things you imagine, like I mentioned earlier. Some people, when they look at all the possibilities of their future, there are no possibilities that they feel like are worth living for. And I know you had kind of some of that, and yet by faith you were willing to keep digging in and go, I don't know exactly what it'll feel like or be like, but I believe it can be better than this.
That's right.
And it did happen.
Yeah.
And it did happen. And it led us, frankly, to think thoughts and have conversations and go into places that we probably wouldn't have been willing to go to. I thank God for it. Like, it was part of it was definitely a catalyst that forced us deeper in our relationship and even deeper in our theology and our thinking and brought us closer together. But I can absolutely see how it could have been the death of the relationship or something that, I could have, being a poor partner, could have made you feel, more despair, more hopeless. So I thank you for being honest. The reality is I knew something wasn't right. I knew something was off. And so you're not fooling anybody. Like, all you're doing is just creating confusion to the people around you that want to help you.
Right.
So whether you're a male or female, to find those people that you can trust, hopefully, they're around. It's one of the things that frankly motivates me highly to have as healthy of a church as we can. Yeah. Because, the Bible talks about, God will put, the orphan into families. He puts the lonely into families. Like, in some ways, like maybe some people's literal family doesn't offer this support. And, I hope as a church, as we continue to, grow and mature, that we can be a beacon of hope for some that are like, where would I go? Maybe you can't go to your parents or your siblings or your best friend. They couldn't handle this maybe. To continue to build that out within our community. Yeah. We have work to do, for sure, to do that. But, I thank you for being willing to allow me into that journey. And that's all I have to say about that.
Well, I can't thank you enough for being willing to be part of it, because I know, it's not always an easy road, but, I agree with you. I think we came out the other side so much stronger, so much closer. It really was such a healthy outcome on the other side. And I think there is always hope for people to, maybe your life situation that you're walking through, you're like, that's great for you that, you were just able to come out the other side of it. But I have real things that it doesn't matter if I quit drinking. It doesn't matter if I don't numb out. It doesn't matter what even if I get healing and help for, issues with depression or whatever, like, this life situation is still going to be there on the other side of it. You're right. The life situation might still be there on the other side of it that you aren't excited about living with day to day and walking through, but your experience of it can be vastly different, and it can be beautiful no matter what it is. And I think that something that you talked about recently about being able to have really clear eyes, and see things not through rose-colored glasses, but not everything doom and gloom. Truly clear eyes to go, this is hard, but there's still beauty in it, and there's still beauty on the other side of it. And I think that is the huge blessing that you get on the other side of something like this, is you come out on the other side with wisdom. You come out on the other side so strong, and with really clear eyes to appreciate life for all the things that it is, and you also have the ability to turn around and comfort other people or be there for other people who are walking in the shoes that you were just in.
So I have one more thought. I know we're kind of bringing this in for a landing, but I have one more thought on some of the why around why all these people taking their own lives, particularly men. I read a book a while back, and it was talking about actually suicide rates in different countries, and it was actually written, I believe it was referencing like studies probably before the information age, before like particularly social media age.
Correct.
But they were talking about how countries where there is more of a economic disparity have higher rates of suicide. So in other words, if everybody's broke, if you're in a poor country, but kind of everybody's poor, like yeah, there's a few people like with money, but for the most part, it's like we're all in the same boat. Those suicide rates are low, even though a lot of those places are hard to get food and shelter. Like, I mean, their standard of living is pretty much worse than everybody that you know. You know what I'm saying? Like, but because they're all in the same boat, there is less despair.
That's fascinating.
When there's disparity, the countries with higher economic disparity had higher suicide rates, because even if you have more than someone who's in an impoverished country, you're constantly faced with someone who has it better than you.
Yeah.
Someone who has more than you. And so that gap is constantly in your face, and it's creating just such a despair. So as you think about now the information age, particularly the social media age, when you have the disparity is in your face all the time.
Yeah.
Not just when you drive through neighborhoods, but every time you open up your phone. And that disparity is sort of sometimes put through filters to make the disparity even seem to be greater than it actually even is.
Right.
And then if you take and then you add the male component, which is, I think, particularly men feel this back to their sense of masculinity around their ability to provide, whether for themselves or the people around them, a certain level. And when I am low on the provision, I'm not able to provide as much, and I'm on the wrong end of disparity, it's my fault. It makes me feel like less of a person. It makes me feel less valuable. I respect myself less, feel deeper feelings of despair. I'm not saying that social media is the lone culprit, but I think those dynamics that were around before social media have probably been heightened by social media. You add that to 2020 and all that's happening there, I think that's probably why it's hit somewhat of a crescendo. I think one of the reasons for optimism is we have normalized, at least more so, normalized the mental health conversation.
Yeah.
It's become more normalized. It was something, like you said, for a long time, men wouldn't talk about, or people wouldn't talk about it. Otherwise, you'd be seen as crazy or, whatever, put in this category, and nobody wants to be in. But I think that's changed quite a bit. I think it's been normalized quite a bit. So I think that's positive. But I think we have, like, on one sense, the normalized conversation. On the other sense, the disparity feels like it's at an all-time high.
Yeah.
And so I think in some way we have to find a way to, in a healthy way, figure out how to live in that sense of disparity without finding despair, because it is what it is. It's in the world. Like, there's people that have more than you, man, and they're gonna often put it in your face. And if that is ultimately, if you're going to allow that to be kind of at the center of how you see yourself, and you just let nature take its course, I think it can have catastrophic effects, especially when you add it to other complex issues. So
that's such a good point. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap. I just encourage people, if you need support, if you're the person that's walking through a dark time, or you're the person that's supporting someone walking through a dark time, do not hesitate to reach out and get help and get resources. We'll attach a few in the show notes that I think are really valuable, that could be a good place for you to start. And Greg, thanks for being part of this conversation, part of my own personal journey, and bringing a lot of value to this space. I think that you really embody what it means to be you know, you're a very manly man kind of guy, you know, and you're very comfortable in your masculinity, and yet you are also very comfortable being open and vulnerable and real. And I think that that is a real encouragement, and maybe help some other men step out into that space and recognize it's not one or the other. You can be a really fully integrated person, right? You don't have to deny one piece of yourself to accept another. So thanks for that.
Thank you. I love you.
Love you too. Bye, guys.